This is a test for the afternoon live stream. Hello, live stream. Okay, thank you.
Hello everyone, we have about 10 minutes left of the poster session and then we'll be beginning our next talk.
Sure, of course. Was that Portuguese?
Have you tested or?
Well, 5 minutes until we begin the next talk, so finish up. If you're learning some wonderful science at a poster, and we'll get started here shortly. Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're going to try to begin our next talk pretty soon, so please go ahead and take your seats. Please take your seats for the next session. Thank you.
Pode estar, não? Take control. Hello everyone. Let's gonna start the next section. I'm Laís Moreira. I'm a graduate student here, and I hope you enjoy the symposium. And we would like to invite you to sit for the next presentation. No one's coming. So okay. It's a pleasure to me to introduce Dr. Sandra Milak. Sandra Milak, who is going to talk to us about her experience to building collaboration to improve food production in Brazil. In 2003, she joined the DuPont Pioneer as a breeder to develop early products for southern region in Brazil. While she was in Brazil, she also worked as a professor for the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul for 12 years. She also worked at Embrapa. Embrapa is a Brazilian institution that works with agriculture. Currently, Dr. Milak is a global leader for system and innovation for breeder at Corteva Agroscience. Please join me to welcome Dr. Sandra Milak.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? No? Perfect. Excellent. Everybody's ready to go? So I'm going to start saying that this is such a pleasure for me to be here. I am a former student of University of Minnesota, did my PhD here, and which I'm very proud of. I'm going to talk stories about it today. Not all the stories, because I'll need probably a full week to tell all the stories, but I'll tell some that are related to this topic that will help us to perhaps have some insights about this particular topic. But you know, I graduated and end my PhD in '95. So since then, I have never had a chance to come and speak again at the university. I mean, I had chances, invitations. Ron Phillips invited me to come for his retirement, and unfortunately, because in Plant Symposium as well invited me a few times, it ended up that we never worked. But I'm so glad to be here back. And so I'll say that you know. The punchline for my presentation today, the message I want you to get when you go back is basically that the challenge that we have in front of us in agriculture is enormous. You know, it has been enormous for a long time, but today it's not less than it was many years ago. In fact, I think it's worse because we have not only to produce more food, but we have also to do in a way that does not impact the environment, that helps the farmers to stay profitable, that helps us to actually also to feed the world. Right? This is, in fact, is the title of the provocation of the presentation today. Right? And because this is such a very, very big challenge, we need every single one of you to help with that. It's not a job that private sector or universities alone or institutions of agriculture in places like Brazil, like Embrapa or USDA are going to be able to do by themselves. We have to work together. But working together is not an easy thing. It's not even easy when we are trying to work together with colleagues in the same institution. Moreover, when we try to do this across different institutions and across different cultures, different countries, right? So I think it's more than ever, we need to exercise the patience, we need to exercise the drive of being able to do that. And I think, when I was here last time that I was in this particular place, actually it was when I was a graduate student, and we had an event with Dr. Borlaug. It was about international agriculture. Look at, we're back here talking about international agriculture. And as a graduate student, I was invited to be in the panel. And you know, it was interesting that now, after so many years, I'm back here to tell you all the things that I learned that, you know, how they turn up to be in the last 25 years for me, and how I live that experience myself. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. Okay? We have a plan? Let's move. Okay, so I mean, again, I think this was already mentioned by all the other speakers. You know, the challenge that we have in front of us is we need to produce more food. We're going to have more people eating more, so it's more food. And why we'll talk about Brazil today, there are two reasons for it. Brazil has a lot of land in agriculture, probably is still a country that has potential to double the amount of agricultural land that we can produce food on. Today, Brazil has 64 million hectares of agricultural land. We can actually double that without touching the forest, only with the pasture and the cerrados area, right? So it is a place, if we really need to produce more food for the world, it's a place that we should be thinking about it, right? But there are lots of challenges of doing that, and that will require people and technologies to do that. And that's where the story starts to become real, because we need the universities to be able to prepare these people to do that. We need the, you know, investment from both the public sector and the private sector to do that. This is how much we invest today in overall research in Brazil. This is not agricultural only. I just want to tell you that. But it just gives you a perspective of the amount of investment relative to the GDP of Brazil. And it is half of what US does in terms of percentage. So US is about 2% of GDP of US, and in Brazil is about 1.3, something like that. So it's half of that. But then because Brazil has, you know, a GDP that's much smaller than US per capita, so we actually are investing 10 times less in Brazil in terms of investment for R&D overall than US is, right? So when you look at these countries where we saw today with other speakers the challenge that we have, usually there are countries where R&D is not, we don't have a lot of investment. And if we really want to talk about innovations and how we transform agriculture, we need to be investing. That's, I think, is important. And because this investment is not trivial, it should be a collective work that we do, and that's the first point, right? That private, public, and everyone gets involved with that. That's the first point I want to make. So I want to start talking about how my experience with collaborations through my career started, right? And again, as a former student of both Howard Rhines and both they are here today, and Ron Phillips, we don't collaborate if you don't build relationships and trust, you know. So I think the things that we did by then, I think, help us to actually build that. And the interesting part is when I look at these people, I mean, I'm still working with them. In fact, it's interesting that some are my colleagues in Corteva, some are, people that I meet at university or I still have connections with. And it's just amazing how small and how connected we are. And it's a wonderful thing. So when I was in Minnesota, one of the things that I learned and took from here was the fact that here at the university, the students are really prepared not only for the public sector, a situation that was very different from where I came from, when I came from Brazil, right? I did my master's degree in Brazil, came here for a PhD, and there was, I would say that at least half of the students by then from the plant genetics, from the agronomy, plant breeding and genetics graduate program were going to the private sector. So it's very common that people get jobs in the industry, very common, which was very different from Brazil. Most of people were prepared for either to work in the state institutions, research institutions, or work at Embrapa or universities. And there is a reason why that was. And so when I went back, and mainly, as I tell you today, mainly because the breeding sector by then was still heavily based in the public institutions in Brazil. So there was not a lot of companies investing, and you see that through the transformation that we had in the last 20 years, that changed. And because that changed, it also required that the university had to change as well. And you see that not all of them are up to speed yet, but that's one thing that we need to help as well. So here is, I'm finishing my PhD, going back to, College of Agronomy to teach plant breeding for agronomy, undergrad and graduate level. And I was fortunate we had a breeding program at the university, so we had like old varieties, and which kept us connected to the private sector. So the breeding programs, again, this illustrates that the breeding programs were sitting, many of them in universities, like Minnesota also had breeding programs, which was a great experience for me to be able to understand and work here and take that. But at the same time, there was, besides that, it was also a lot by Embrapa. Embrapa was an institution that was created in the early 70s in Brazil. Until then, all the breeding, besides university, was done by what they call the state institutes. There was like a Institute of Campinas, some of the institutes, São Paulo had a few, Rio Grande do Sul had a few, the state was paying to develop that. And if you look at it, and I just translate the 10 top ones, Embrapa has over years launched a lot of different varieties in many, many crops. Right? And they were doing all the developments in soy, just as one example, were done by Embrapa. And I would say 90% of the area in Brazil in soybean was varieties that Embrapa was developing out of Londrina Center, where they have the the soybean center of Embrapa. And the interesting part of that was that soybean, again, was, in other crops there was not much investment in the private sector for that. Some reasons were because, there was not until 97, and you can go next one, that Brazil actually recognized the variety protection in Brazil. And in 97, when this was, became a law, and again, in 97 was 2 years after I was back, right? So by then, so still lots of breeding programs in the public institutions, and this law came, and you can see the number of varieties that were, and this is across all institutions in Brazil, okay? When you look at number of registered varieties in corn and in soybean, both conventional and GMOs. And you can see that, in 98, counting from 98, when finally this law was approved, until recent years. And you saw that there was a period that this didn't really jump, but then, with the private investment, probably that will start going very, very high. In fact, if you look at the data from 2000 to 2009, we completely flipped how breeding was done in Brazil. It was 80% public and became 20% public and 80% private. So you see the number of crops, across all crops, how many varieties in this period were private versus public, which require people at both universities and in these research institutions to start working with the private, understand what is this private is going to do, right? And what is this, how we establish these relationships. At the beginning, as I was, at university and then at Embrapa for 2 years, there was a lot of, pushback to work with the private companies. And in fact, I'll tell you that I have a story to tell about this, because I was, in 2003 was when I moved to the private sector. I had by then jobs at both university and Embrapa, and I dropped both of them and went to the private sector. Did like a courageous thing in my career. When I went there, and because I had so many years at university, so many colleagues and professors at university that I had great relationship with, they said, okay, why don't you come after, I think 2 years I was in the private sector, why don't you come and tell us about how the life in the private sector is, right? I came back and started talking to them, okay, this is how this is going, we are hiring a lot of people with master's degree and PhDs. Our research station was a new station, that's why I was hired. And we had, just hired 5 people, they had all master's degrees and all, And they said this, we don't believe that, because private companies, they don't hire people with degrees. All they want is to hire technicians. They hire one person, which is the breeder, where you like, with experience, and everybody else is technicians because basically it's field labor, right? That was the misconception that they had. And I told them, this is changing. Private companies are coming here. They're starting to invest a lot more money, a lot more, and the breeding programs are becoming a lot more complex. We need people who know how to deal with decisions and data and, and molecular breeding, things that you've got to have people who understand this in a different level, right? But this is just to understand the misconception that existed. And I'll tell you very honestly, many of my colleagues came back to me and say, you sold your soul to, to the private sector. You're not going to do science anymore now, by the way, right? Because science we do at university. We don't do at the private companies. And I'll tell you, I did so much science since I joined the private sector. And, and that was a completely misconception. But I think this is just one example of when we look at in Brazil, it helps us to understand how this evolved and how the relationships that exist today between the private sector and the universities and Embrapa, why they are how they are, right? And understand a little bit better, right? And in fact, I was like looking a little bit at the data, see how is that, and I found some articles, and I brought this one because they're talking about how public universities are finally slowly accepting working with private sector. Because until then, it was like, if you are doing any research that is paid by the private sector, you're tinting yourself, right? I mean, it's just like, okay, you're doing something, you're biasing yourself towards one thing versus the other, right? And I know that there is, something that we need to be careful when we do things, but it's very different than what the experience I had when I was here. So in that sense, I think U.S. has been much ahead of in that sense. They're much closer between the private and the public sector than in Brazil. But this is the work that we need to do, and it's probably not for me to do, but for several of the people that I met today that are here, future students from Brazil who are going to go back and they will do that. Some of my students that are today, professors at Viçosa and URGS and other places, that they have to do that. They have to help to change that, because again, the challenge is too big for us to try to work not together as a team. So. I want to pause here and talk a little bit about, the challenges and say how investments, being between the public universities, Embrapa and in the private sector, I've seen how important the work that has been done by all these institutions to change agriculture and how this has, resulted. Just give one example. One example of the soybean. Soybean got into Brazil in, was varieties from U.S. that got into Brazil. I think it was in the early 19th century, 1880. You still, and they took to Bahia, where lies is from Bahia. So they took there, but because of latitude and because of so extreme, the weather was so extreme, they never could produce anything. So then soybean went to the south part of Brazil. And at the beginning, all they did with soy was it was like grazing and, was pasture. There was nothing about like using soybean for food, right? It was all about like feed and that, right? But it stayed that for many years, and it was in the 70s that we start getting more traction in developing cultivars. And moving with Embrapa. Embrapa put a lot of effort in developing a lot of cultivars. And it was after the 1997s when the private companies start getting an incentive to actually also breed varieties that we have really moved. So soybean today is the largest crop in Brazil. It occupies 50% of the land that we plant overall. So you see the magnitude of this, right? And plus, it has completely torn the agribusiness in Brazil. It has made the agribusiness to be, we used to import, and now we are one of the major exporters of soybean in Brazil. And I think for me, why I bring this story to you, because this is one example of when we all work together and when we put our minds into develop something, and we can really turn around the agribusiness of a country like Brazil. And that's what happened, right? Last year, I think it was at parity, if not a little bit more than U.S. in total production of soybean. It became between number 1 and number 2 with U.S. In terms of production of a crop. That start from scratch, and it was the breeding, it was the agronomist work that made this to become a reality. So we can do this. We can do with other crops. We can do with whatever we put our minds around that. Okay? The challenges in the tropics are enormous, right? They are not trivial. And I would say soybean today, we are in parity compared to U.S., which is a very advanced country in terms of both breeding and agronomy and all that. We are parity in the same levels of average production in Brazil, productivity in both countries the same, right? No difference, right? Average. But when you look at other crops, and here are we have high biotic and abiotic stress. We have high input and high cost because we have to apply a lot of fungicides and all those things. And year-to-year change, you have drought, and then you have frost, and then you have all those things are incredible. And plus, because in Brazil, where we have these crops, we have 365 days of production of these crops. With corn today, safrinha and corn, we call safrinha is the second, safra, right? And safra which is the summer corn. In Brazil, there is always corn planted someplace. And for soybean, probably very soon will be there. The only reason soybean, they are like trying to find periods of stopping plantation to avoid to manage the Asian soil rust. But it's a government. If they would let, probably everybody would plant every day, right? It's just the reality. So you can do that. Besides having all this land, you can actually have a crop 365 days a year, which is phenomenal. But that brings a lot of complexity, right? And this is the Brazilian agriculture. I mean, you have super big farms with a lot of technology where you produce 250 bushels per acre of corn, very, very, very technified. And you also have the small farmers, right? Which I had also a chance to work with several of them as a breeder back in Passo Fundo as a corn breeder, right? Where you have much smaller, very geographically hard to plant, all the other things. So that's the other level of complexity that we have. Corn evolution in Brazil, again, I told you, this is a lot given the work that was done by both agronomists and breeding companies, and how we move that management to a different level. Average today is 5 tons per hectare productivity across the entire country. Here what happens in the last 10 years. In Brazil, in 2008, the average was 3.6. So in the last 10 years, we moved 20% of productivity on average, both genetics and management and all that, right? Just 5 to. In US, we moved also 20%, but from a level of 9 to 12 tons per hectare. So, there is potential to do that. We know that. We can do better. We can produce. I mean, we're talking about land. We're talking about, we want resources in the world. We want to save that, as citizens of the world. I mean, how come you need double of the land to produce the same amount of corn, right? And it's not one person's or one company's job to do that. It's all of us together, agronomists and everybody, to be able to help this. If you look at the world resources today, we are accountable for helping with that. And here is an opportunity that we have. So with that, because this is such a big, big endeavor, and we as Corteva, we start talking, okay, who should we work with, right? And what are the opportunities for us to engage in work? And it was interesting. About 2 years ago, there was an event here in Minnesota. Everything comes back to Minnesota. We actually, the president of Embrapa, who I knew him as well from connections. Again, goes back to connections and relationships. So he was here to launch the one program, as they call LabX Flex, which is sort of is a program that Embrapa had with the university. And I came and talked to Tabaré. It's like he's going to be there. Okay, I'm going to go and talk to him. And Tabaré came as well. Me and Tabaré came, talked to him, and he said, look at we have such you guys are the major agriculture research company in Brazil today. Yes, Embrapa has 49 units across Brazil. They work with everything, all the crops, and their mission is very different than the mission of our company. Our company is about the business, right? We're there. We're going to be in the places where we are still making money, and it's a profitable business. Because if it's not, I mean, there is no return on investment. There is no reason for us to be there. That's the reality. Embrapa is there to actually sustain the agribusiness in Brazil in the longer term. That's what they are there for. So their role is very different. If we decide that we don't want to plant soybean in Bahia anymore for whatever reasons, but there is a strategic reason that the country should be doing, they're going to be researching there. And they're going to be preparing the way maybe one day it becomes important, right? It's the story of soybean again. You know, now that we have all this productivity, look where soybean is moving is back to Bahia, where it started, and it failed completely. It's moving that frontier now, and you know, and that is and the companies now are going, but somebody was there to test and to open that first, right? And they were there for that. So, you know, and they work with 78 species, so they have breeding programs for everything, and they have in that. So this is their strength and their mission, but it's also their weaknesses, because working with Embrapa, as you can imagine, is very complex. You know, it's like a focus is very complicated. You have to work with, you know, institutions are complex in nature, right? You have lots of layers and lots of, you know, to get to do that. And said, okay, this should not stop us, right? Because we see the value and we see how as long as we can find a shared purpose to work with Embrapa, that's something that we are all behind it. We should be able to do this. And that's what we did. We started talking to Embrapa. But here is another example, before I get to the specifics of the collaboration, of how Embrapa has helped us jointly in Brazil to actually get where we are to 365 days. One no-till system, nobody believed in that. For a very long time, there was like Embrapa pushed that very, very hard. And that's why we have safrinha today. That's why you saw the nice big farm pictures where people are harvesting soybean with the, you know, the harvester, like with the combines, and they are planting corn right behind it. That's why that's possible, because of no-till system, right? So again, it explains this is a system, right, approach. And as a system, why it's so important to be working with people like Embrapa. So with Embrapa, we said, okay, you know, we are going back to innovations. And we are at the point of new innovations in genome editing. It's just one example, right? In digital. These are two areas that are going to transform the way we do business in the future. It will help farmers to produce more with less land, hopefully with, you know, and cope with some of the stresses that are getting worse with all these changes in climate and so on, right? So we said, okay, we cannot do everything today in Corteva, just cannot, right? So how we can partner with you so that we can use this technology to be working with things that today we are not working with. Soybean drought is one program that Embrapa is very strong on, but we don't have dedicated efforts to that. But at the same time, using this technology to be able to see, can we move this ahead? Can we go? Where this can take us, right? And be stewards of that. So with this, first thing we did, a couple of years ago, we signed the contract with them. We made this master agreement. The second thing we did, we actually gave them a license, free of charge, of the CRISPR technology. Corteva today has rights to IP rights that has been negotiated with all the parties. I mean, it's very complex IP landscape for this technology. Corteva has rights to that, and that can be given to other partners. So we gave to Embrapa not only work with these projects, but work in all crops. Why this is important? Again, we are starting a new era with technology innovations. You know, like we did some years ago with, you know, with GMO technology. We need to be thinking this in a different way. We need to be thinking, you know, a lot of criticisms, and as soon as I left the university, I was discussing about this with people who, of course, they were not scientists, and, you know, and their concern was really that, you know, we are going to use this technology to control, to be in the hands of fields and all that. Here is an opportunity for us to say, look, Embrapa has it. they can use whatever, because it's not, if they improve mango, citrus, and even soybean for things that, they should be doing that, right? But at the same time, it helps us to show that, okay, this is a technology we want to be available to be able to work and attend to new crops. It was mentioned today, at the same time, to do areas that we are not going to be, because we cannot do everything. And the things that we're going to do, yeah, we will have rules for the things that we're going to do to sustain our business. But there are so many more things that we're not going to do. And in those things, absolutely, we should be good partners. And even the things that we do, we should be bigger than that, much bigger than that. So here are some examples in soy, and one other one we did was with a project that they have with carioca beans, which is a staple food in Brazil. Everybody who has been in Brazil knows rice and beans is every day in every table of every person, right? How can we help to improve this crop or help Embrapa to actually get something that people can eat? It can start understanding, I'm eating something that is better, right? Hopefully they will start getting more up to speed with the innovations that we are bringing to agriculture. And the third, it's a lot of details here, but it's really how we help with the tropicals, how we help the digital tools to start managing the risks that we have. The risk in terms of production, predicting yields, and how we manage that. Asian soil rust, there are so many things that go beyond a farmer's fence that needs to be looked into it. And Embrapa does play a very important role into that. They have all the, the satellite, tracking of everything that happens in the. They are the ones who actually enforce the forest code. So how can we help them to start using, and they help us because they do have a lot of investment into this as well, to manage risks in a different level. And that's sort of, and so that here is not as much as genetics, but how we close that gap in the agronomy side. We're talking about, okay, we have to double the productivity. How we do that from the agronomy side, not from the genetic side only. Okay? So, no, my time, I'm sure is almost up, so I'll just finish this and to tell you that when you open up for this type of collaborations, and when you say, okay, I'm here, let's work this together, and it's not easy, it's hard, and it's not only hard to start, but it's hardest to keep up with as it is to start a collaboration, trust me. But here is one opportunity, and here we were We were invited for this last December when the new agriculture Ministry of Agriculture of Brazil was getting. This was a day before or a couple of days before she got to be the Minister of Agriculture, and so they were sort of transitioning between the current and the former. So they invited, and they had this. The idea was to inform politicians, government about this technology. And we had a panel of innovations where we talk about gene editing. Here is sitting, Alexandre is from Embrapa Soy. He was sitting here. Me and Luis Carlos Federici is a professor as well at Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. And here we were discussing with this guy. He's the guy who actually coordinates all the phytosanitary laws for Brazil. So he was here, and we had over 500 people from Congress into this event. Here is an opportunity, and the beauty of this, we're all talking the same language. You're saying, you know what? If we want to do this, we either do this together or we don't, and you guys have to help us. If you really want technology to boost the agribusiness of the country, you gotta do this with us. You cannot just be fighting against, right? And this is why we believe this is what we should be doing, right? But I think just one other example that's the type of, when you get to that level of collaboration where people can come together and start influencing what we do, then you can do the transformations that we talk about, right? I mean, do 3 crops a year. You can do, you can take crops that were pasture to become the top crop for the country. Okay, I'll finish talking about, this is, I thought it was a good quote from Burlock, because he was a believer of that. And he came here was interesting that he talked about, he ended his talk talking about that his experience over the years. He said that when he was a child, his father was his hero. Then when he learned about his father, you know, when he became, you know, a professor, or like, you know, a scientist, and he started learning about more of the world, he said, like, okay, he learned how little his father knew about what he was now learning, he had learned, right? And then when he came here, it was like he was just getting older. He said, now I understand that it was not all about science, right? It was about his knowledge, his relationships, and the things that he learned from his father. So I thought it was a good quote. So I want to remember that, and I think if we want to be in this, we need to be in this together. Thank you.
So let us know if you have a question. Andy is helping to take all the questions from you. Any questions to Dr. Sander?
Thank you for your presentation. I have a quick question. So when you talk about you dealing in an agribusiness company and you're working with the public sector, how does, and I'm assuming in the agribusiness you think about predictions in economics, how do you foresee the future of the trade market between China exporting most of the soybeans in the future? And how do you balance that your production will reduce in the US? And what is your opinion from a scientist that has worked in the public sector and the private sector? And what do you foresee, how do you leverage the sustainability of soybean production in Brazil versus the reduction of the deforestation? Do you think about that?
So first of all, it's a very loaded question. Lots of questions in one question. Let me try to, you know, to separate the questions there. So let's start with the last one. So where we are today with soy, as an example, is not in the forest zone. So, and where we can grow, it's in the Cerrados area. Cerrados area is an area that is, you know, it's not forest. So I think that's the first thing. I think there is still a lot of places that we can move agriculture in Brazil that do not require us to cut the forest. We're cutting forest for other reasons, not because we need to cut forest to put soybeans. That's, I think, is the point, right? We do have, as a country, an opportunity to grow and grow with that. That's the first point. Second point about the tariffs, and it's a very interesting question, and I don't know where you want to get with this question, but I always think about my role today is a global role. My team helps probably more North America than Brazil. You know, I say 80% of what we do probably helps to boost yields in corn and enable that corn and other crops, right? In soy as well, but for U.S. as well, right? So then it comes to saying, are you trying to play, you know, Brazil versus U.S.? I mean, there's not such a thing, right? I mean, that's where it comes. Like we are enabling the technology. It's not for us to stop that. That's my opinion, right? And I think that's, you know, and as when you look at about feeding the world as well, I think we need to look at this in a more holistic way. We cannot start thinking, oh, I'm not going to do this because of that. I'll tell you, even within Brazil, we have disrupted ourselves many, many times. We had investments in the summer. And what happens is that the way it evolved is that the corn is moving more and more into safrinha. And in fact, we had, when I started in Pioneer, there was like 2/3 was summer and 1/3 was safrinha. Today is actually the opposite. And we had to cope with that because that was the right thing to do. We had to even move investments from one side to another one internally. We had to do that because this was what was needed for the country, what the farmers wanted, and we had to do that. We had to disrupt ourselves into that. And I think that's the same what happens across the boards, right? Sometimes you have to disrupt yourselves. You have to be better in one place to be able to stay in another place. And that it's a balance, a fine balance. But I think, yeah, if we go into, oh, I'm not going to do this because of that, then I think you just like, in the longer term, you kill yourself. Because you stop innovation, you stop doing what you need to do, right? And I mean, I think we're privileged that we have not had a situation of not having food. I'm sure that most of us here, although there are many Americans and many people in the countries who are below the poverty line. There are many, and for other reasons. But it's not because there is not enough food to be bought or to be, right? But look at what is happening in Venezuela, and I think some of you brought today. Is that we have already 1.5 million people who have crossed the border, and there is probably potentially another 1.5 million who are going to be crossing the border if something doesn't happen very, very soon. So we have in the Americas, where we produce all this food, we have a crisis, and people are moving because they don't have food. Basically, food is one of the things. It's not the only thing, but food is one of the things that is moving them. This real is happening for political reasons, not because we don't have food, right? But it's happening. So at the end of the day, what happens is that we are so connected. Whatever you do, if you don't help to maintain the balance of the world, will shoot back into you, right? This 3 million could be coming here, and then you're going to have a problem. So you better be ready for it before it happens. The day we had one of our board members was saying that he mentioned something that I thought was very wise. He said, friends, when you need them, it's too late to make them.
Any more question? Andy, one question over there. Oh, yeah.
Could you please talk a little bit more about your opinion of the CRISPR technology influences on the seed business? CRISPR-Cas9.
Yeah. So this is one of the technology in the toolbox, right? It's one more technologies. Here is my opinion, right? One of for me, the two major problems that we still haven't tapped too much into with technology in breeding. One is recombination. Recombination is still a random thing, right? We haven't not been able to control. There are genes that disrupt recombination, increase recombination, but we haven't been able to control it. The other one is, of course, is genotype by environment interaction that we still, we are not able to understand enough to be able to actually manipulate at the level that we need to, right? CRISPR, for me, is not going to give you new recombinants or control recombination, but it's the closest you can get to go into the genome and modify what you want without disrupting everything else. Lots of challenges still to get this technology to be where it needs to be. But this is the first, and again, it's the first tool in the box, right? And hopefully from there we can get to a place where we can start manipulating the changes we want to do in the genomes the way we want. If we get to that point, I think we are going to revolutionize how we do breeding, because then you don't do a cross and select for and do predictions and select for whatever, right? You go there and you modify what you want, and then you get what you, hopefully, much more precise changes that you can test. So that's why those two areas for me are so important. And the other one, again, is genotype by environment interaction. We need to have better ways to measure, not only measure that, but also move from prediction models that are very linear based on additivity to really take into account nonlinear relationships. To both, from Pioneer came and talked about it in the past, like, whole genome predictions, crop models, and things like that. I mean, we just got started in that journey, but there's a lot to do. And I think we will get to a point that we will be able to do that better. In fact, I think using predictions today, we can probably we are almost to a point that we can do as a good job or a better job to predict a product than testing 1 year, or testing 1 year. So if we get, my dream is that if we get to the point that we can predict the stability of the products. Because the last year when you advance a product has a heavy weight in the way you advance that product. So if we can say, you know, yeah, this is a very good year for this product, but by the way, this product does not have stability because I can predict that based on this information, I think we're going to also change the way we launch products and keep them.
Thank you for your talk. I'm just curious, you said that the partnership of Corteva and Embrapa. I'm just curious to know a little bit more, how does it work in practice? Like, is there an exchange of personnel that comes from Corteva to the Embrapa? Do Corteva provide more, I don't know, reagents or more intellectual capacity or vice versa? How does that work?
It depends on the project, but I would say let's just look at the CRISPR one, right? Because most of the CRISPR ones are projects that are probably mainly Embrapa is driving it, right? They are driving. So basically what Embrapa was able to do last year was to approve an internal fund from Embrapa. I think it's $1 million, something like that, for Embrapa to be able to have all. And basically what we do, we are providing technology and we are also helping with people, like hiring postdocs, things like that.
Any more questions?
How does Europe's ruling against using CRISPR-Cas9 or gene editing affect Corteva's plans for marketing to that area?
Sorry, I think can you repeat the question? I think I didn't understand.
How does Europe's ruling have against?
Okay,
yeah.
okay. It's complicated, right? No, Europe is complicated. I mean, it's so I'll tell you when this happened, the wiki happened, was when we had this event in Corteva last June of last year. We were all together. We had people from Europe. We had this was the New Frontiers in Science in Genetic Evaluation. Maybe some of you participated to that. And we were there, and there were like people, and that was exactly that week that the news came from Europe that they would do it. And I think everybody felt like this is like a cold water on top of us, like, oh gosh, this is starting again, and we have to fight all this, right? So I think right now we don't really know because there are a lot of countries and there is a lot of things going, discussions happening, right? They are trying to go back and discuss. And some countries are saying we're probably going to not follow that in Europe and all that, right? But the reality, if we have to go to a very heavy regulated because of Europe, right? Then I think the potential of using this technology for innovation is going to be limited to the hands of the few that can avoid to pay for, which happens with GMOs. People talk about GMOs, you know, all the companies. What happens is when you spend $100 million to deregulate an event, who can do that today? Just the big ones. So I mean, it's backfiring on you. If you really want this technology to be everybody to use it, it shouldn't be heavily regulated because otherwise it'll be in the hands of the who can pay for it. And I think so. The heavy regulation, if we get to that point, and right now there's a lot of going on to understand that. Americans have been overall have a position of not regulated very, very heavily. They are like going to regulate based on products. Canada, United States, Brazil, Australia has a similar position to that, right? We're going to look at the product and we're going to see, does this product really meet the criteria? Does it has any problems, right? And then safety of food, whatever, right? And that's how they're going to regulate. They're not going to regulate the process, which for me makes a ton of sense. Because if you start regulating the process, then you start causing the restriction of how you're going to use these innovations for agriculture. And this does not stop in the row crops. In fact, those probably will afford to do it because they are profitable crops for these companies. It's going to actually hinder the advancement in the new crops and the things that we are right now trying to do and we don't have technology to do it. That's where we're going to hinder the progress. That's my position. So I think that's, so yeah, we'll see what's happened, but we are all in this fight, so please help, right? Because it's about innovation. It's not about who regulates who, what.
Let's take a last question, if you have it.
There's been some work on South-South technical capacity development. In other words, Embrapa working over with the countries in Africa. How does Corteva view this in terms of South-South work? Are people in Brazil with Corteva or other countries in South America working with people in Africa, Corteva people?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we are in Africa as well. And we have efforts in Africa that are both philanthropic as well as business. We are in Africa. We are committed to help Africa as well. And I think this is one area that, to be honest with you, is an area that I think we have a great opportunity to work with Embrapa to help with that, right? Because Embrapa has, in some of these countries, is present, we are not. And I mean, there are opportunities for us to use this collaboration for that. And in fact, we start talking about that, but we never really progress too much because of the changes in the government in Embrapa itself. The president is a new president and all that. So when we start talking about that, like, let's just pause and see when this is the right time to talk about. But I see opportunities, and not only with Embrapa, but with how we join efforts in some of those things, right?
Let's thank you, Sandra, one more time.
All right, everyone, we're going to have a short coffee break here and then get started with our final talk of the day in about 15 minutes.
Well, we're just right on time, I guess. So wait, hey, you want to start 10 minutes after?
What's that?
You want to start at 3:15?
No, we'll start at 3:05.
Test. Test. Huh?
Hello? Hello, everyone. Can I have your attention, please? We'll be starting our final talk, the keynote speech, in about 5 minutes, so if you could find your seat, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're going to start here in just a minute. Please take your seats for the keynote address. Please take your seats.
Good afternoon to you all. I'm very excited this afternoon to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Abdul. He is the lead base breeder at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in Nigeria, and he has come to us today with a wealth of wisdom and experience in maize breeding, tropical maize breeding. Please join me as I welcome on stage Dr. Abdul.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank so much for the organizers for giving me this unique privilege and the honor to be part of this symposium and share with you my experience in the development and delivery of nutritious maize. What I will try to do is I would like to blend some science with development in my presentation. In the morning, Saeed has already described, hidden hunger to some extent, and I would like to relate it with overall hunger and how the global effort is trying to put something in place, to address the issue of micronutrient malnutrition. Millions of people in Africa and Asia live in extreme hunger, which is caused by primarily by poverty and very many other factors. And one form of chronic hunger, which is caused by micronutrient deficiencies, which include iron, zinc, and vitamin A, is called hidden hunger. And hidden hunger strikes, at the core of our health and also vitality, and it's detrimental to children, pregnant women, and nursing mothers. A global alliance, which had been created for quite some time, has advocated, in increasing the natural nutrient concentration of food crops as a complementary strategy in the fight against hidden hunger. In my presentation, I would like to highlight, a regional approach which tries to implement some of the efforts that have been made at the global level. More than 2 billion people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America suffer from the ravages of iron, zinc, and vitamin A deficiencies. And according to the World Health Organization, these nutrients are the most essential ones for humans, and they are really needed in very small quantities to play critical roles in our physical and mental development, as well as in regulating cellular functions and also metabolic processes. When you look at these three global maps presenting the prevalence of deficiencies of the three nutrients, the deficiencies are very severe in Africa, as you could see, which are shown by bright or dark colors, with children, pregnant women, and nursing mothers suffering the most because they require large, high amount of these nutrients, for their development. The major causes of iron, zinc, and vitamin A deficiencies are essentially socioeconomic circumstances. The low-income families living in sub-Saharan Africa or other regions, they depend on either root crop-based or cereal-based diets, which are high in calories but low in vitamin A and the two essential minerals. And these families also do not have access, to year-round supply of micronutrient-rich food crops such as green leafy vegetables, fruits, and others, because of the limited land they have, to cultivate these crops, as well as the lack of irrigation, warehousing, and transport facilities. Their low income doesn't really allow them to buy diverse and nutritious foods and also animal products, which are very, very rich, in micronutrients. And the debilitating effects of micronutrient deficiencies are really very many, and they occur from infancy, childhood, and goes to adolescent and adulthood. Once they occur, at the early stage of the life cycle of an individual, they stay with her or with him throughout the lifetime. The most widely used interventions to mitigate the effect of micronutrient deficiencies are supplementation and fortification with vitamin A and minerals. And these approaches have been very, very successful, in developed countries, but they have been largely ineffective or unsustainable in developing countries because of the lack of a robust and reliable infrastructure for food distribution, poor governance, and also inadequate funding and high recurring costs, and limited access to healthcare system, which is really critical to find out, what is the nutrient status of the target population, so that the population receives enough but not excess, which may lead to potential toxicity. Plant-based approach with a focus on production and consumption of micronutrient rich non-staple and staple food crops have been advocated, by international bodies as complementary, not standalone approaches, to fight hidden hunger in developing countries. The Harvest Plus Challenge program, which has been operating under the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, has laid a global alliance of multidisciplinary research and also development partners. And it has been focusing, on enriching the major food crops such as rice, wheat, corn, or maize, and others with vitamin A and minerals, and deploying, the products coming out of the breeding program, to rural families who have limited access to diverse diet supplements and fortified foods. The institutions that I work for, IIT, is an active participant of this strategy. And the benefits of this approach are really very many. One, these staple food crops have been, part of the culture of the rural communities for generations. And as a result, they have been consumed in large quantities and in very many traditional foods. So any improvement that is made, in terms of their nutritional quality can have really significant impact on the livelihood of the people. And in the remote rural areas or in the rural areas, the families consume what they produce. So once nutritious crop varieties are introduced into the farming communities, they can be inexpensive sources of micronutrients, and in fact they can even promote self-reliance and sufficiency for the communities year in and year out. The excess consumption of supplements and fortified foods, particularly with vitamin A, can lead to toxicity and the associated health problems. On the other hand, crop-based foods are really safe to eat by all members of the family because our body converts and absorbs what it only needs, and the rest is excreted from the system. So it is really a nice way of dealing with potential toxicity. Micronutrient enriched crop varieties can be distributed to farmers using the existing channels. They don't really require any specific development, development of specific delivery channels. Why do we look at maize as a vehicle for micronutrient enrichment? If you look at these two figures, both maize production and also it is used as a source of food in Africa have increased significantly since the 1980s. Out of the 22 countries in the world that depend on maize as a major source of calories for their diet, 16 are in Africa. Over 70% of the maize that is produced in Africa is consumed as food, and it is used in very many traditional forms. It is a major component of the infant weaning food, and also used as green maize, consumed either as boiled or roasted to mitigate seasonal food shortages. The Harvest Plus Challenge program had a product development and delivery pathway which have undergone 3 phases. The first phase focused on discovery, which was trying to set target trait levels and also determining whether it was feasible to do breeding for enhanced micronutrient content and defining products at that time. And the second one was focusing, the second phase, focusing on development and extensive testing for adaptation, and at the same time whether the products would be really useful to humans, the assessment of the nutrient retention and bioavailability. And the last one is has been focusing on registration and release of nutritious varieties and also their multiplication and to foster deployment to farming communities. A global meeting was organized which involved well-known persons in food science, nutrition, breeding, agronomy, socioeconomics, and other disciplines to determine, the nutrient levels that were that are required, to meet the dietary needs of women and children. At that meeting, the existing consumption patterns were considered with key elements which are listed here. And based on these factors, at the meeting, the target levels were set, for the major crops, that were considered under Harvest Plus. And for maize, the target set for iron was 52 milligram per kg. For zinc, it was 37 milligram per kg. And for provitamin A, it was 15.5. When you compare that with the baseline, the additional improvement that was required, through breeding was quite substantial. At the same time, breeders at IIT, CIMIT, and other organizations embarked on a series of studies to determine the feasibility of attaining, the goal that was set by the global team. And the results of those studies clearly showed that there was sufficient amount of genetic variation that was available for breeders for zinc, iron, and provitamin A that can be exploited through breeding. And the expression of provitamin A carotenoids were found to be more consistent across environments, whereas those of iron and zinc were less consistent. And provitamin A carotenoids were also found to have really high heritability as opposed to iron and zinc. And all the correlation analysis that were looked at that time clearly showed the possibility of combining multiple nutrients in maize without compromising yield. Considering the high probability of success that could be attained fairly quickly, based on the favorable genetic properties of provitamin A, the Harvest Plus Challenge program decided to focus on provitamin A as a breeding target. So at that time, we just wondered whether we need to wait until we have products which meet, that 15.5 microgram per gram, or we really need to do something else. So we came up with a sequential product development and delivery schedule to enable us assess potential adoption patterns of these. These would be new products, so let's see their adoption patterns by farmers and also users, other users. And if there are really some problems, we can respond to those problems and make some adjustments based on the input that we get from the farmers and consumers. So based on that, there were 3 products that were defined. The first product was should have 40 to 50% of the target level that was set, and that was slated for release in 2012. The second generation of products with 16 to 80 microgram percent increase of the target was slated for release in 2015. And the last generation of products which meets or exceeds the target was slated for release in between 2017 and 2018. In our germplasm development program, the first driver of the breakthrough was the availability of well-characterized biosynthetic pathway. In maize, the 2 dominant carotenoids are lutein and zeaxanthin, and these 2 carotenoids do not have any vitamin A activity, whereas the other 3, alpha carotene, beta carotene, and beta cryptoxanthin, have very high, they have vitamin A activity, but they represent less than 25% of the total carotenoids in maize. And with beta carotene having twice more vitamin A activity than alpha carotene and beta carotene, and that became really the target of our improvement. We did a lot of screening of our adapted germplasm using HPLC, and the best that we found, from our screening work had between 4 to 5 microgram per gram of beta carotene, and which was really quite low compared to what we were supposed to attain, the 15.5 microgram per gram. At the same time, we learned that there were temperate embryo lines that have 6 to 14 microgram per gram of beta carotene that were available in the University of Illinois. And we requested for those embryo lines, and Torbert Rochford graciously supplied those to IIT to do our provitamin A enrichment work. When you look at these pictures, those embryo lines were really poorly adapted, to our tropical production environment. But they were invaluable sources of high beta-carotene alleles, and we crossed them with our elite embryo line. And then after 1 to 2 generations of backcrossing, they became really invaluable sources of new embryo lines. We developed embryo lines from these backcross populations primarily through repeated inbreeding using visual selection, simple visual selection for desirable agronomic traits and also resistance, to the major prevalent diseases, as well as, kernel color and texture. And later on, when we had advanced embryo lines, they were characterized, based on HPLC. And this picture represents some of the embryo lines that came out of, the backcross breeding program. I would like to give you just 1 or 2 highlights of the extent of progress that has been made in the development of provitamin A enriched maize embryo lines through conventional breeding. The ones in the box are the lines with provitamin A content exceeding, the target state under the Harvest Plus Challenge program, and all these lines, most of these lines have very high beta-carotene content. Whereas a whole range of embryo lines with less than 15 microgram per gram of provitamin A, when you compare them, they have really a broad range of distribution of xanthophylls, which are basically lutein and zeaxanthin. Whereas, most of these embryo lines, they had really low level of lutein and zeaxanthin. But recently, we have started looking at some interesting embryo lines coming out of our breeding program, which combine high beta carotene with others promoting carotenoids such as lutein and zeaxanthin. I want to describe the results that are shown in this figure. All the numbers that are in brackets represent provitamin A content in microgram per gram. And as you can see, except probably for one embryo line, most of them, they have really, except for this one, all of them, they have exceeded the target level in terms of provitamin A. When you look at group 1, the profile clearly shows that the embryo lines were high in lutein, zeaxanthin, beta-cryptoxanthin, and also beta-carotene. The second group represents those embryo lines which were high in zeaxanthin and also high in beta-carotene, with some of them having high beta-cryptoxanthin. And this group of embryo lines, they were very high in lutein and beta-carotene, but very low in other in either carotenoids, indicating the possibility of really making dramatic shifts in terms of carotenoid profiles in maize, through conventional breeding. We use the high provitamin A lines, to develop maize varieties in our part of the world, West Africa. open pollinated varieties are still the dominant cultivar type. So we, and the private sector is also, coming up, emerging, developing. So we have targeted, 2 products, hybrids, and these 2 products were essentially selected for high provitamin A content and high yield potential. And I personally believe, having, these 2 desirable traits in a genotype is just like riding a motorbike which is carrying 2 goats on it. In 2 recent regional trials which were conducted in several locations in different countries, we are finding, some open pollinated varieties and also some hybrids with about 13 to 16 microgram per gram of provitamin A, which is essentially hitting or exceeding the target level. And these products are better than the first generation of products that were released in the various countries. We also have some program on developing, high zinc maize, because zinc has really a huge impact on the population in sub-Saharan Africa. And it also plays a very critical role, which are associated with vitamin A in the human body. Zinc is required in the conversion of vitamin A to an essential pigment, which is called retinal for vision. And it's conversion of provitamin A carotenoids to vitamin A. And it's also involved in transporting vitamin A in the blood. Several human studies clearly showed that zinc deficiency in humans negatively also affects the vitamin A status. So simultaneous improvement of these 2 nutrients in maize may enhance vitamin A metabolism and function. So we have a breeding approach which with a focus on short term and also on medium to long term. We had very limited activities before 2014 with a focus mainly of screening our adapted materials for high zinc, with the hope of identifying those that have high zinc content to develop hybrids with intermediate level of zinc. And we have now, since 2014, we intensified, our efforts to develop high zinc maize, and the major focus has been screening, the already high provitamin A materials, for zinc content, to select those that already have, high zinc for product development with the 2 nutrients. And at the same time, we have also done a lot of crossing of high zinc by high zinc and also high zinc by high provitamin A line, with the hope of developing new generations of inbred lines that either meet or exceed the target set under the Harvest Plus program. We used some of the inbred lines with intermediate to high level of zinc in hybrid combinations, and we are beginning to get some hybrids which have high concentration of zinc and at the same time high yielding. The screening work that we did from between 2012 and 2017 of provitamin A enriched inbred lines led to the identification of several promising lines with intermediate to high level of provitamin A and also intermediate to high level of zinc. And we are currently using these inbred lines to develop hybrids, and the hybrids are currently being tested. In our region and also in Africa, the farmers do not only confront, the problem of micronutrient malnutrition, they also confront in their production environment, a host range of stresses, such as recurrent drought, high temperature, and also infestation with a parasitic weed, which is known as striga. And recently, we have a serious threat of a new pest, which is fall armyworm, that is decimating maize in sub-Saharan Africa. And climate changing is another challenge. And in the morning, it was indicated that climate change can have an impact, a negative impact, on the nutrients of the major crops that were looked at: wheat, maize, rice, and soybean. The zinc and iron protein content was low. Our breeding program, for high provitamin A and zinc was completely separated, detached from the breeding objectives and development of other products. So we have now opted with approaches, that focus on developing stress-resilient maize varieties with enhanced provitamin A or zinc content by exploiting, the existing materials that are tolerant to drought and heat stress, and also resistant to Striga harmontica. For provitamin A, there are confirmed high throughput markers which have been very valuable, that can be used to speed up our breeding process. But for zinc, there are not markers yet, but we have decided to use conventional breeding to move things forward. And now I would like to move, we have made some progress, some varieties were released, but are they really going to be useful, when they are converted into products? Can they have really any potential impact? So a number of studies were conducted in Africa and outside Africa to look at the nutrient retention in order to assess the potential impact of consuming provitamin A enriched maize, after processing and also after storage. In one of the studies where they looked at the effect of drying, retention of beta-carotene was more than 50%, but there was a big range after drying the grain. And after storing the flour for 4 years, when they also looked at the retention, it varied from 64% to 73%. But the losses were much greater depending on the variety when they were stored for 6 months and when the retention was looked at. Particularly in some varieties, it can go as low as 35%. So several other studies were also conducted to look at the conversion of provitamin A enriched varieties and hybrids into the different traditional African and also other processed products, which were prepared in different ways. So if you look at the summaries of all these studies, the retentions were generally very high. And there is a whole range of variation because of differences in varieties. So this shows that there is a possibility of selecting suitable genotypes for the various traditional food preparations and processing. Roasting and boiling are the two common forms of food consumption, maize consumption, in sub-Saharan Africa. So the studies that were conducted in Africa clearly show there was a retention exceeding 60% or more retention of beta-carotene in those products, boiled products. And you can clearly see, varietal differences exist in maize, that can be exploited. Even from these studies, you could clearly see big varietal differences. So there is a possibility of selecting some suitable genotypes even for this purpose. In one study, it was found that consumption of 1 to 2 boiled ears of corn can supply up to more than 50% of the estimated average requirement of vitamin A for children and women. A series of human studies were also conducted to look at the bioconversion or the bioavailability of beta-carotene in maize and other crops. And as you can see, maize has close to 6:1 conversion ratio, and it was found to be better than orange sweet potato, orange fruits, and also green leafy, mixed green leafy vegetables. And by the way, the conversion ratio that was used to set the target, the 15 microgram per gram of provitamin A, was 12:1, which was taken in the assumption when they defined, the target set. So these are really favorable outcomes, for provitamin A enriched materials. IIT has collaborative research with advanced research institutes, the land grant universities, and also Summit. We work with national and food science institutes, as well as the national research and centers, and also universities, which has led, this collaborative effort led to the successful development of provitamin A enriched varieties. A public sector plant breeder who really does not champion the commercialization of her or his best products will have very little impact at the farm level. So we realize, that situation, and we have established, a network of partners that are involved in testing, registration, and release and deployment of varieties. These are all the institutions, including the private sector, that are involved in, all these processes. We are also collaborating with national policy institutes and lobby for better seed legislation and also varietal release regulation, so that the products can reach the farmers fairly quickly. How do we get connected, to our partners in our sub-region? We normally share our elite products through, our regional trials in the sets of trials which were requested and dispatched, to partners are shown and in here. And these trials have been involved over sources of promising open pollinator varieties and hybrids, which were further tested, by our partners in their respective countries. And there were quite a number of varieties that came from these regional trials, which were released in Ghana, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, Nigeria, and Cameroon. As you can see, the synthetics that were released had a provitamin A content of 6 to 11 microgram, whereas the hybrids have provitamin A content of 7 to 14 microgram per gram. These products are competitive, to the farmer, or better than the farmer preferred varieties in their own on-farm trials. It's not only, having the varieties getting released that really matters the most. Our partners should also have, access, to breeder seeds. So we supply breeder seeds of synthetics to the National Agricultural Research and Extension Systems, and also individual seed producers and community-based seed producers, and also parental lines of the hybrids to small and medium-sized private seed companies, to support their further multiplication and deployment. And this is a graph that I would like to show about the quantity of certified seeds that have been produced and marketed in West Africa. These are pro-vitamin materials by the NARES, community-based seed producers, and also the private seed companies. They are increasing. I would like to summarize my presentation in line with the theme of the workshop. As I indicated, science was the engine that was the driver of mining of favorable alleles from diverse temperate and tropical germplasm, which allowed us to develop products with envisioned nutrient enrichment. And the collaborations that we have had, with diverse research partners was the fuel, that drove this engine. The multidisciplinary research was the crucible, where the usefulness of the products was tested in retention, bioavailability studies. And in fact, out of these studies is coming an input, for breeding. We need to further boost provitamin A level to offset, the potential losses coming, out of processing and so on. And also we need to really critically look at shifting, the carotenoid profiles in maize so that, we can maximize the benefits that we can derive from maize. I personally believe working with other disciplines is critical, is critical for our own good and also for our own success, glory, and survival. That's how I personally believe. Collaborative framework that promotes or encourages, partners to use their talent, knowledge, capital, and connections, with the internal national institutions, also leaders, would be, the bedrock that can fuel the spread of nutritious maize in Africa. I would like to acknowledge a number of individuals. First, I would like to thank Harvest Plus for providing the support to our breeding program for more than a decade. And I would like to also thank Torbert Rochford, who supplied the temperate Imre lines that were really the major ingredients for pushing our provitamin product development forward. I also want to thank James, Sherry, and Wendy, who have helped us in very many ways in nutrient analysis and also training our staff, to use the latest advances in the various machines, and also colleagues who are working at IIT that have been involved, in this product development, and the partners, who have been really the shakers and the movers of this whole thing are the private seed companies and also our national partners. I would like to thank so much, for the organizers, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to come to the University of Minnesota and share my thoughts with you. In particular, I want to thank Emmanuel, for doing an outstanding job in making my travel very smooth. I want to thank Leslie Everett, for providing me magnificent support, personal support for me and also for our program, and for leaving behind, outstanding embryo lines that we have been using, in our program so far. I want to leave you, with this quote, which I thought was relevant, to this global hunger, which is really a big challenge. And this is, a proverb of encouragement, from Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdallah. We can take questions now.
Hi, thanks for your talk. So this question is about perhaps the cultural landscape. To what extent do you think your target market is aware or concerned with their own nutrient deficiency?
There is a lot of awareness creation that is going on at the government level and also at the local level. The major bottleneck that I see is just how do you really address those issues, the issues of resolving those problems. But farmers themselves who are suffering from deficiencies and so on, they are aware of the problems, and there has been a lot of campaign that's going through the radios and various channels to sensitize the communities.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. You're doing really great work, and I was wondering if you could. We had a discussion with you in the morning. You show that the inbred lines have a high level of vitamin A and zinc, but you also show these graphs for hybrids. How do you see, are these farmers adopting hybrids, or do you foresee them moving into a hybrid system? Because they do show a greater nutrient level and yield as well. Is there something impeding, hindering this adoption, or is it just cultural, or?
Yeah.
Can you go over that?
Africa is just a mosaic. If you go to southern part of Africa, the predominant cultivar types are hybrids, and also Eastern Africa, hybrids dominate a lot. But when it comes to West Africa, the predominant cultivar types are open pollinated varieties. The private sector is, in the last 10 years, is developing, has emerged really very fast, and they are growing. And then we are also trying to promote, the development of the private sector, in West Africa, so that there will be a sustainable supply of improved seeds to farmers. That is the strive. So that's why we are still focusing on both open pollinated varieties and hybrids. We can't wait until the private sector dominates the area. There are even the multinational seed companies that are currently operating in West Africa, but they are operating at a very low level. So I think because of the market, the awareness, and the whole range of the socioeconomic circumstances, and the whole range of factors, that are impeding, that rapid change in West Africa. So once those changes happen, and which is happening now, we are getting medium to small to medium size indigenous seed companies, just springing up and getting stronger.
Do you see consumer preferences following this trend as you're starting to make these more, nutrient-containing maize? Because I know with the talk this morning, Paul Porter mentioned that the white corn tends to be at a higher price, and I know that there's a preference for white corn, which it kind of goes against putting in the carotene or carotenoids into the corn. So do you think that you'll be able to increase consumer preference for this type of corn?
What I want to say is, the yellow corn that came as food aid. As you know, in the U.S., yellow corn is yellow maize is produced for animal feed, and the quality of the grain. You know, the Africans, because they utilize maize as a major, you know, food source, they have a preference, you know, for kernel color and also kernel texture. And the one that came, you know, as a food aid, you know, it was just an off type, and it was not really desirable, and it didn't really meet the requirement of, you know, the consumers in Africa. That's why, you know, we had the problem. At the same time, you know, in some parts of Africa, if you go to Eastern and Southern Africa, the preferred color types are white. But now, you know, the CEMIT has been promoting, you know, provitamin A enriched maize varieties for the last 8-9 years in Zambia. Zambia used to be a no-go zone, you know, for orange maize, and now, you know, they have embraced, you know, the orange maize. So education, training should be, you know, an integral part of, you know, this the change in consumption. When you come to West Africa, there are in fact like 3 or 4 countries that will never touch white maize. You know, you go to Sierra Leone, Liberia, and also even Mali, you know, they prefer, Burkina Faso, they prefer yellow. So a whole lot of Guinea doesn't want to see even any white maize. And Nigeria is not really very fussy about colors. You know, all the green maize that you see in Nigeria is all yellow. And in fact, what the Harvest Plus program did is to differentiate between the yellow, you know, which had, you know, that stain, you know, bad stain in the past. All our provitamin enriched products are bright orange, so they become really unique and very attractive. So that is the strategy we follow.
Any more questions? Any more questions? All right, please come and thank Dr. Abebe one more time.
All right, well, let's give our speakers one more round of applause for the wonderful talks today. And I think our breakout sessions, the students that came in and give the breakout session talks also probably deserve a round of applause. Those talks were fantastic as well. All right, so for some final pomp and circumstance, we have the poster competition awards. So starting off with third place, coming to us from Michigan and a travel grant recipient to this symposium, Natalie Kaiser. Yeah, can you take pictures? Yep. Yeah, we'll get everybody up here and then take a picture. Can you hand it to him quick? Thanks. All right, second place for our very own University of Minnesota, Austin Dobbles. And then third place, I don't know if I see here anymore, but Julia Cubbins, are you still here? Okay, well, we'll get her. I'm sure she'll be very excited when we pop into her office and let her know she got the prize. Okay. And with that, we'll start with some closing remarks. Oh, yeah, do you want to get a picture? I can take a picture. Okay. Selfie. These are the things you don't think about when you're learning.
Excellent. We want to move into some closing remarks and kind of wrapping up the event. So first off, we want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time to take part in this event. Without you, the guests and participants, this event simply couldn't happen. We hope that you learned something new today, that you met someone interesting, and that you've gained a new perspective on your work and on your interests. Often, things in agriculture can seem dire. How can we feed the world, providing sufficient nutrients to every person, while also preserving the health of our planet and serving as good stewards of its resources? But my biggest takeaway from today has been that none of us, wherever we are alone in this fight. In every part of the world, passionate and brilliant people are working tirelessly to address the challenges that we all face. And I don't know about you, but that gives me a lot of hope. And I hope that all of you on your travels home today take that hope with you and take that hope to your work and just kind of let that serve as motivation in the things that you do.
All right, and so to close, so we'd again like to thank our sponsor, our founding sponsor, Corteva, of course, for being with us all these years, a huge part of the symposium. Also to the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, who we've been working with for a number of years now and have really enjoyed getting to know in that relationship. New this year, the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council, so we're really excited to start working with them and get to know that group. The College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences for helping us out, and also to Ad Farm, who helped us with our graphic design last year. And finally, of course, we couldn't have done this as co-chairs without our wonderful committee. And it was something truly special because most of our committee members this year, this was their first year on the planning committee and maybe their first or second plant science symposium that they've even gone to. So the fact that we were able to bring in these wonderful speakers and all of our student travelers is really fantastic, and we're very proud of them, and I really can't wait to see what this group can do in the future. And please follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with our events, and so you can hear about us next year, of course, and we'll probably be bugging you with emails as well. But this is a great way to keep in touch with us. And with that, we'd just like to say thank you for coming, and please join us for a networking and celebration event at Black Stack Brewing. And if you're traveling, one of the travel grant recipients, please come talk to John Hill and I, and we can make sure to get you a ride there from the hotel. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Could we please have all of the speakers and any visiting students who are left, and also the committee members, come up for a group picture?
Yes.